learned and to encourage you to do everything you have to do. I know when I was invited to speak, Lord Mayor, the first time after I'd written that first book, Crown the Customer, I found myself being invited to speak at different usual chambers of commerce and things like that. And somebody got in touch with me to know could I speak at one of the regular monthly meetings, and I was trying to fit it into my diary. And he came back and said, oh, I forgot to ask you, what do you charge? What's your fee? And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm a grocer, I'm not a public speaker, I don't charge a fee. Oh, he said, that's wonderful, because we hold these meetings every month, and if the speaker doesn't charge a fee, the money we would have paid him, we put into a little kitty so that we can afford a good speaker every now and then. It puts you in your place very early on. And I was just wondering what I was going to say to you, and I was working the other night with my daughter, and putting down some notes, and she said, Dad, whatever you do, make sure you stick to a script. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, do you not remember what happened when Orla was born? Orla is the youngest of her 4 children, and I phoned the hospital to know was there any word about our daughter who'd gone in to have a baby, and I was told the great news that a little baby girl had been born 15 minutes earlier, and I said, that's great news, delighted to hear it, now they both well. And the nurse said, yes, the little baby is very well. And then she made a mistake as to whom she was speaking, and she said, and your wife is very well too. And I thought, that's great news, but I should explain that I'm not actually the husband, I'm just the father. So you can see why Gillian says, Dad, if you're speaking to those people, the entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, make sure you stick to a script. No, I'm not going to stick to a script, but I did do a little script of 4 letters. And the 4 letters are B-E-S-T, because I think if you're going to succeed, you've got to be the best. And the B stands for boomerang. And the boomerang came from the business I grew up in. My father ran a holiday camp. And fellas, if you have a chance of being born again, do your best to be born into a family that runs a holiday camp. It's a smashing way to go. I think it's nice for the girls as well. But my father ran Red Island holiday camp in Skerries in North County Dublin. And the guests, 500 guests, would come every week from England. And we paid them. And the concept was that they paid on the day they arrived. Now the reason I'm telling you this is because my father's concept was the objective is we don't want to take any money off our guests. We've made a deal with them, everything's included. And so the objective of the business was that the guests would come up at the end of the week and say, Mr. Quinn, I had a great holiday, I'm coming back again next year. And I believe when I opened my first Super Quinn way back 50 years ago, 53 years ago, I gave equity a little boomerang. Because the concept was that everything we were going to do in our business was to get the customer to come back again. And I believe that's the boomerang principle that should apply to every business. So whatever business you're planning to set up, whatever you're planning to do, just think of the boomerang principle, that everything you do is at the long-term customer, not taking as much money off the customer on this visit, but making sure the customer comes back again and again and again. And I think that applies to every enterprise, every business, probably even to politicians as well. Can you manage to get your customer to come back again? And the only person who's ever objected to my view on that was a funeral undertaker. Didn't fancy the idea. But even in his case, it isn't the deceased is the customer, it's the family of the deceased. So he did a good job in Uncle Joe, so when Aunt Maisie dies, we send her to him as well. So, but that's my first principle, my B-E-S-T, the B is boomerang. That's to help you remember that. My second one is E. And the E, and I was trying to think what I would do on E, but I was chairman of Unpost for 10 years. I remember saying to some of the people in Unpost, in Super Quinn, what we did was we spent time every week out on the shop floor, meeting the customers, hearing what they wanted. And some of the senior executives in Unpost said, but Chairman, you don't have to do that. We did that 20, 30 years ago. We don't have to do that anymore. And I had to think of, now, how do I argue that the customer's views are changing? And there's a lovely quote, and that's where my E is from. It's an Irish Shanachal. Eish lefun nahan is yoey tulis. Listen to the sound of the river and you catch a fish. And I believe the second letter is Eish, which is listen. Because it's no good listening to these guys were saying to me, but we did that 20, 30 years ago. But the water in that river is changing all the time. And so whatever your business is, whoever you're dealing with, their needs are changing. And whatever they wanted 20 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever the water in that river is different today than it was yesterday, and it's different certainly than last week and last year and 20 years ago. So my second thinking is Aish the food now. You've got to remember your day yet to remember what Aish stands for. And my third one is S, B-E-S, E-S. And the S is the importance of a smile. Meeting somebody and giving them a smile and welcoming them on that basis. Now mind you, I think if I was a funeral undertaker, I'm not sure that I'd be good at meeting somebody and say, did you hear the one about, it's not quite but the importance of having somebody with a smile is very important. The importance of having the people who are working with you, enjoying what they're doing. Let me tell you about John Davitt. John worked in our Ballantyre branch until 1994. In 1994, what's that, 20 years ago now. And John came to me in mid-December and he said, Feargal, I've worked here for 9 years, but I'll be 65 on the 31st of December. And I just want to say that I've enjoyed the 9 years I've worked here. I wake up every morning looking forward to coming to work. And I look at my watch in the afternoon saying, oh, it must be 4 o'clock, and discover it's 6 o'clock. The day has gone faster than I thought. And I thought, gosh, that's wonderful. But he said, I'm going to retire at the end of this month. And I know you like us to come back and work for a couple of days a week or a couple of hours a week, but my wife and I are things we want to do. And I thought it was very impressive what he said to me. But John died on Christmas Day that year, 6 days before he was due to retire. His wife died 3 days later. We had 2 funerals in that time in Ballantyre in that church that week. And we talked about it afterwards, and we talked about what he'd said. I wake up in the morning looking forward to coming to work. And I look at my watch thinking it's 4 o'clock, and it's actually 6 o'clock. The day's gone faster than I thought. And we said, could we manage to find a way that everybody working in our company, and we ended up with about 5,000 people there, could we end up with every one of them looking forward to coming to work and looking at their watch thinking the day has gone faster than they thought. Now, the reason I mention it is I think that's a challenge everybody has. That it isn't just that you should enjoy your work, but if you're going to have people working with you, whether they're working for you, whether they're colleagues, whether they're customers, can you make sure that they find the experience and enjoy the experience? And if you can do that, it's amazing what we can achieve on that basis. So that's B-E-S. This I'm trying to give you a very short lesson. And the T stands for technology. And this, of course, applies here. Because it seems to me that the opportunity to be able to do new things is just marvelous. And it means thinking sometimes very simple things that you can do. I know my wife and I went to an hotel in the United States, pulled up into we flew over, it was way over in California, we flew to Los Angeles and then flown to this town, and the taxi took us to the hotel, and we were very impressed that as the taxi pulled up in the hotel, and it was a big hotel, 10 or 12 floors, the taximan opened it up and said, Mr. Quinn, you're very welcome. And I said, gosh, they must be expecting me. I'm very impressed. And we were very impressed that he knew. And he said, you've been here before? And I said, no, I haven't. But he said, reception's over there, we look after your bags, and if you just head over there, we look after. Where have you come from? I said, well, we've actually come from Dublin, Ireland. And he said, that's a long journey. And I said, well, it took us about 10 hours to get here. And he said, well, you must be tired. I look after your bags, head over there to the reception. And it was a room, the reception was as big as this room. And we headed over through crowds just like this. And when we got to the reception, the young woman behind the counter looks up and says, it's Mr. Quinn, isn't it? And I said, yes, gosh, they recognized me. I haven't been here before. And she says, and you've come all the way from Dublin, haven't you? And I said, yes. You must be very tired. That must have taken about 10 hours. I was wowed by it. But I was wowed to the extent that I went down the following day to see, how did he know my name? How did he know all this? How did the receptionist know? And as a taxi pulled up, if the taxi was bringing a new guest, he pressed the button, the boot opened, the trunk they called it, and the doorman went running behind, looked at the name on the suitcase, and then opened the door and said, "Hi, Mr. Blake, how are you? You're very welcome," or whatever that was. And I remember that as we watched, Mr. Blake had his golf clubs coming out, and he said, "You've been with us before, Mr. Blake." It wasn't quite a question, it was a question. Mr. Blake said, "Well, actually, I was here last year, and I shot a round of golf in '73. It was my best ever round of golf, and I'm going to conquer it even better this time." And I said, "Well, you're very welcome, Mr. Blake. The reception is over there." And I watched and went over with Mr. Blake. And Mr. Blake, as he got to the receptionist looked up and says, "It's Mr. Blake, isn't it? Aren't you the guy who shot a '73 there last year?" But the answer was high technology. All it was that the doorman had a little microphone inside his lapel, and he was able to open the boot of the car right enough to see the name. He was able to whisper, "The guy we're going to there is whoever it is." I mention it because it seems to me it has to be customer driven. Now that hotel was an ordinary hotel, but they excelled in the customer service. And they excelled in the fact that every customer felt recognised. So whatever business you're in, I'd love to leave you with that thought as well. Let me leave you with one last thought. I had a visitor, and I wrote another book called Mind Your Own Business, and found myself going around the world, being invited usually to supermarket companies and others. But going to Japan, I met a man called Ito, Mr. Ito, or Ito-san we call him, and visited there a few times. And he came back to Ireland, it must be 7 or 8 years ago now, and he and his wife came and they came round our supermarkets, and as we left Blackrock to come home to Howth where we live, and he said to me, "How long have you been in business? When did you start? And how many supermarkets have you got?" And I said, "Well, started in 1960, I was 23, and with my first shop, but we now have, I think, 24 shops at that stage." And he said, "In 1960, I too had one shop." And I said, "Anito-san, how many shops have you got now?" And he checked with the interpreter, and they worked out. Now, I was very proud having 24 shops, and he said, 14,700. I said, "Ito-san, what was it that made..." He'd opened his first shop in 1952 and the second shop in 1962. And I said, "Ito-san, what was it that made you different than all those others who in 1960 also had one shop?" And he said, "Let me think over that answer." And it wasn't until we got out of the car and home some half an hour later, he said, "You asked me a question half an hour ago, and my answer is a quote. It's not his own quote, but it's one that he liked to read. Others had used in the past. And he said, "Whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're right." He said, "I play tennis, and if I go in against that guy, I haven't a chance." You're a good tennis player, I'd say, right? Yeah. Yes, I haven't a chance against him. So if I go in there thinking I have a chance, I haven't. On the other hand, if I go in against him, do you play tennis? Good, I can beat that so-and-so. I'd love to leave that message, because I think that's a message that's necessary for Ireland, but it's even more necessary, not just for Ireland, but also for every individual, no matter what you're doing for living. Whether you believe you can, or whether you believe you can't, you're right. I believe the message we heard from the Lord Mayor tonight reminds us of the things that we can do and that we're successful in. I just believe that believing that you can do it